Can a sequel jump the shark if you didn't like the first one? Okay. Hi, this is Sinclair. Welcome to the Underhold. It's just going to be a quick review on The Boy Part 2. Um, I watched Part 1 not long ago, right before watching this Part 2. I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but it did have some interesting things. It kind of sold itself on being a supernatural doll film like Annabelle, something along those lines. And it did have some twists to it to where, it turned out to be, uh, a man living in the walls, making it seem like there was a possessed boy doll. Structurally, it was fine. What's interesting is there's not many slasher films that come out now, so it was in the slasher vein. It made a bunch of money, but ultimately, it just didn't completely get me. I wasn't just in love with it, but it wasn't the worst thing ever. But it made a lot of money, so they created a part two. And I watched it. It picks up with the first story completely existing. That's my cat. My cat makes lots of noises. Uh, but a completely new family. It's just a family living on their own, like in a city, and they have a traumatic event of a home invasion, and that leads to the son of this family not talking. And they eventually end up moving near uh, the house from the first movie, and the boy finds the son of the family finds the boy doll that was from the first movie. And then, of course, some of the same stuff happens of, is the doll moving and things like that. Uh, and in general, the writing is still on par with part one. It's mainly structurally sound. It has some pretty big twists, though, that almost retcon part one. And it does have some reliance on um, dream sequences for some of its scares. Um, and in general, in some ways, what this does in its retconning is it turns it into the type of movie that the first movie was kind of promising before the big twist. Um, Without giving too spoilery, and I'll actually get very spoilery soon. Uh, but the acting is pretty good in it. The writing is largely okay. There's parts that have to do with trauma of a random uh, breaking into a robbery, but it actually doesn't become too relevant to the rest of the film. It references it back for a couple of scares and explains why the boy in the film doesn't talk, which eventually he does start talking with the doll, and you see that he writes on a notepad and communicates that way. And they start encouraging that because they think that the doll is allowing him to start communicating with the world more. But, stuff, of course, starts turning as it is a horror movie. But there's not too much to say aside from that before you start getting into spoiler territory. Um, so. A lot of the themes have to do with trauma and the home invasion part of the movie. It does play back to him a lot, but unfortunately, it kind of keeps it at that. It's like the movie wants to keep going into that territory, but doesn't have anything real to say about it. And what some of this goes into, I think, a little bit is my theory of like kind of, I want to say kind of female power fantasy movie, but it's not completely it. I would say like stuff like The Conjuring and The Warrens. Maybe I should have put this a little bit in the first synopsis part, but oh well. Other thing I would like to just generally say about the film is that this one changes a little bit from the first one into being a little bit more of a female power fantasy is kind of what I'm calling it until I come up with a better word. But like Lifetime films, they'll have a general like audience they're going for when it comes to like the boyfriend who turns out to be evil or something like that. Well, there's also kind of this genre of horror films that it's kind of like the middle-aged mom Sometimes with like psychic powers, not in this case, but a lot of times like that, battling against a very undefined evil to save their family. And this movie does venture into that territory. For better or worse, I think that's what the first movie promised, and that's what this one kind of delivers on. So if you're into that film, this is, decent. Not going to be the perfect movie, but it'll satisfy that I don't know. I would say like a male power fantasy movie. But it just feeds that little part of the brain of satisfaction. So that's just something to think about there, and I'll see how much this comes into further reviews if I can solidify this thought. So now I'm going to go back to the themes and spoilers. So when this goes into what I call at the moment female power fantasy, but again it's not an exacting term, of generally about usually a middle-aged female character, sometimes with mental powers or spiritual powers, psychic powers, battling for their family. That's what this movie goes into. The doll, one of the big twists is the doll itself now is supernatural, whereas in the first movie it was not. The first movie it was just there's a red herring, there was stuff actually going on, and so a lot of the scares end up with some dream sequences and stuff, which can make it boring, because if you really pay attention to the beats of what's actually happening, not much is happening. Dream sequences become a crutch to try and get a scare every X amount of minutes into the film. But then you end up with this doll essentially influencing many families over the years. The idea is that this doll gets found by a family every so many years, not an exact amount, but it corrupts the child of the family, boy, into some kind of schizophrenic state where it's talking to him and makes them kill people. And it's like literally a demon in the doll. When you get to the finale, there's parts where the doll literally gets its face smashed and you see a demon face and things like that, and it's possessing the boy of the family. So it definitely delves in that territory of just straight up supernatural. I think that's where they're taking the rest of the franchise. So in a weird way, part one made a lot of money, and I think they felt like, since it made a lot of money on a promise and not its delivery, that they wanted to get that audience back by giving them what they were wanting, which was, male Annabelle, I guess. So that's what they're going for, and it didn't seem to work because it didn't make too much money over the weekend. We'll see if they keep continuing the franchise and see if they catch that audience. They really went for it with this main character. She has visions of the doll being bad and notices little bits, and she fights for her son's sanity and saving her family. So it really was going for that Warren's Conjuring thing a little bit. But the acting is good. They could have really went for it. It's just kind of weird it being a sequel to a complete other type of story and just retconning everything. That's what's bizarre about it. And again, it almost becomes like, I guess you would say, like mental illness porn, because of the idea of making the boys or the people who've been corrupted by the doll schizophrenic or things like that, but not having anything real to say about it. That's the real disappointing thing, because there's a lot of stuff that's actually decent about the writing, but it just doesn't all come together. And I guess that's the big thing. It has a big spiritual twist to it. Largely boring if you really look at the story. Yeah, no, don't be. And largely, if you look at the story beats, not much happens. I think they kind of give it away a little bit in some moments if you literally see the doll move, as opposed in part one. So I guess maybe you're supposed to have an allusion to, is this all in the woman's head? I don't think maybe that came across completely right. But overall, It's a dud. Not the worst thing ever, but in some ways that does make it the worst thing ever because it's not so bad it's good. So, alright, thank you for watching my video and you have a good day. Thank you for watching the Underhold.